Welcome to the MangaLove channel. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to MangaLove so you won't miss any of the newest stories. Now, let's dive right into today's story. The night air in New Orleans hummed softly, as if the city were breathing along with the jazz spilling faintly through the open window of Stephanie Douglas's apartment. Trumpets wailed from the quarter in the distance, low and mournful, like the sound of a heart remembering. Stephanie sat cross-legged on her bed, a single lamp glowing beside her, a stack of cream-colored envelopes resting on the quilt like a quiet confession. She wasn't writing tonight, not yet. She was rereading. Each envelope was addressed in her graceful handwriting. None had stamps, none had ever been meant to leave her hands. Her fingers brushed the topmost one, its paper slightly wrinkled from years of being opened and closed again. To Brian Reyes, it read. Just seeing his name made her chest tighten in that strange way that wasn't quite pain, wasn't quite longing, but something in between. She smiled to herself, though it was a sad smile. Brian had been her neighbor 4 years ago, back when Stephanie was still learning how to live with silence without mistaking it for loneliness. She was autistic, not broken or distant, just wired to feel the world in sharper colors, louder sounds, deeper silences. He never made her feel strange for it. He'd helped her carry her books in on moving day, offered her iced coffee every morning from his porch, and treated her hesitations like poetry, pauses that meant something, not flaws to be fixed. He'd simply listened, and she had loved him for that, quietly, without ever saying a word. She had written him a letter after he moved to Washington, pouring out everything she could never say in person. "You make stillness feel like home," she had written, "and I don't know what to do with that kind of peace." But she had folded it, sealed it, and placed it in her drawer, like every letter before it. The drawer had become her ritual, her release, her private world of almost. Stephanie's life, from the outside, was the kind that made others whisper admiration. At 30 years old, tall, elegant, a respected doctor at St. Augustine's Medical Center. Her colleagues called her brilliant. Her patients called her graceful. She worked with meticulous precision, spoke softly, and lived alone in an apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and paper. Yet, beneath all that grace was an ache she could never quite explain. She loved people fiercely from afar. From across rooms, she admired the curve of a smile, the warmth of a voice, the way someone's eyes could soften when they talked about what they loved. But when they got close enough to touch, to really see her, they noticed the small pauses in her sentences, the way she struggled with eye contact, how she needed her routines like oxygen, and then they left. Every time. Her mother used to say, "Baby, you're too deep for most people. They drown before they learn to swim." Stephanie had stopped trying to explain herself after that. So instead, she wrote. Each letter was her way of loving in safety, words she could shape without fear of misunderstanding, words that didn't leave her trembling, words that were hers alone. Tonight, though, the letters felt heavier. Maybe it was the rain or the silence. Or maybe it was because she had just come home from another blind date that had ended in a familiar, polite smile and the sentence she had come to dread. "You're amazing, Stephanie. I just don't think I can keep up." She'd smiled back, said she understood. She always did. Now, sitting on her bed, she whispered to the letters, "At least you never leave me." She placed Brian's letter back in the stack, tied the ribbon around them, and tucked them into the bottom drawer of her mahogany dresser. She had no idea that would be the last time she'd ever see them there. The next morning was like any other. Stephanie, dressed in her white coat and pale blue scrubs, pinned her hair neatly, and walked to work under the scent of wet magnolia. The hospital corridors greeted her with their hum of machines, the rhythm she understood best. Here, things made sense. Cause, effect, diagnosis, treatment, predictable, safe. She was reviewing patient charts in the staff lounge when her colleague, Mariah, peeked in. "Hey, Dr. Douglas, are you expecting a delivery?" Stephanie looked up. "A delivery?" Mariah pointed toward the nurse's station. A courier stood there holding a clipboard and a small empty envelope box. He said he dropped something off yesterday. Letters or something. Looked old-fashioned, handwritten. Stephanie froze. Letters? Yeah, Mariah laughed. Who even mails stuff anymore, right? But Stephanie wasn't laughing. She felt her heart tumble out of rhythm. The box? The drawer? No, it couldn't be. She excused herself and went home early, her mind racing. When she opened the drawer, her breath caught. Empty. The space where her secrets had lived for years was bare, except for a single ribbon and a faint outline of where the stack had rested. Her stomach dropped. Her cleaning lady had been here 2 days ago, Mrs. Lamb. Kind, elderly, always humming gospel songs. Stephanie could see it now. The woman must have found the letters, mistaken them for unsent mail, and decided to be helpful. A trembling laugh escaped her lips, thin and panicked. "Oh, God," she whispered. "No, no, no." She clutched the drawer handle, knuckles white, trying to steady her breathing, but her phone began to buzz on the nightstand before she could. Unknown number. Hello? Hey, Stephanie, it's Jason. Jason McKinley from med school. She blinked. Jason? Her old study partner. The one she'd written about after graduation. The one she'd thought she might have loved. "I got your letter," he said. There was a hesitant chuckle, but it carried something sharp underneath. Wow, that was unexpected." Her throat went dry. "Jason, I didn't." He cut her off gently. "You're sweet stuff, always were. But I'm married now. Maybe you didn't know." "I know," she whispered. "Right. Well, I just wanted to clear the air. No hard feelings." The line went dead. Stephanie stood there in the silence, the phone still pressed to her ear, her heartbeat thudding like distant thunder. Then another buzz, another call, then another. By the end of the day, she'd heard from 3 men. Her first kiss from high school, her college summer crush, her former colleague. Each one called or texted or wrote something awkward, pitiful, or cruel. Each one reopened a wound she thought she'd buried. When the last call ended, she sank onto her couch, her hands trembling in her lap. The letters had been her only safe place, and now her heart was on display to every man she'd ever loved, all except one. She looked toward the window, where the rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. Brian Reyes. He hadn't called, he hadn't written. Maybe he hadn't gotten his letter yet. Maybe he never would. Or maybe he was reading it right now, reading the words she'd once whispered into paper instead of air. She imagined him sitting in his Washington apartment, that small smile of his curving as he read the line she'd written 4 years ago. "You are the calm in my chaos, and that terrifies me." The thought made her heart ache. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of rain drown her panic. But somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the shame and fear, something fragile flickered. A part of her, small but alive, wondered what would happen if he came back. Not with pity, not with confusion, but with the same quiet gentleness he'd always carried. She whispered into the dark, "What have I done?" Outside, the storm grew heavier, and somewhere in Washington, D.C., a man named Brian Reyes unfolded a cream-colored envelope and began to read. The days that followed felt like living inside a wound. Every sunrise brought another message, another reminder that her secrets, her most sacred, unfiltered truths, were no longer hers. The city kept moving, of course. Streetcars rattled past, the morning jazz still spilled from open doors. But for Stephanie, time had slowed into shame and noise. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was exposure. Those letters had been the safest part of her world, the one place she could say everything. And now, the world had said something back. It started Monday morning, a week after the first phone call. She was in the break room at St. Augustine's when she got the email. Subject, your letter. Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. "Hey, Stephanie. Wow, I don't know what to say. You always were kind of intense about things, It's flattering, I guess. Hope you're doing okay." Ben, her former colleague from the hospital, the one who used to linger by her workstation, smiled too long, making her feel seen until the moment he didn't. He'd left her one night at a Christmas party, walking away without explanation, his arm wrapped around someone new. She'd gone home and written him a letter she never meant to send. "I wasn't asking you to love me. I just wanted you to stay long enough to mean it." Now, seeing his name in her inbox, she felt her throat close. She closed the laptop gently, too calmly, the way you might close a coffin. Mariah, sitting nearby, glanced up from her phone. "You good?" Stephanie smiled, but it was thin, stretched. "Fine, just an old friend." "Uh-oh, sounds complicated." She gave a soft laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. That night, she sat in her living room, the air thick with summer heat and the faint hum of cicadas. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. Unknown. "Steph, this is Marcus from college. I got your letter. I didn't realize you felt that way back then." Her chest tightened. Marcus, the man from the summer she'd never forgotten. Long afternoons under oak trees, cheap wine, their fingers brushing when they passed a book between them. He'd called her the quiet storm. Then he'd kissed her once and disappeared by the end of August. She had written him a letter after that, too. "You made me believe silence could be intimate, and then you left me with only noise." She typed and erased her reply 3 times before finally sending, "I didn't mean for you to get it." The dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, still. "It was beautiful, Steph. You always had that gift." Gift. That word felt like salt. She didn't want her heart to be called a gift. She wanted it to be held, kept, returned. She placed the phone face down on the couch, her hands trembling. The days blurred. Days at the hospital, nights filled with echoes. Each man from her past had a different tone. Some polite, some mocking, some too careful. But all of them made her feel like a museum piece they'd stumbled upon, admired briefly, and then moved on from. By Friday, she'd stopped opening messages altogether. She walked home late that night, too tired to think. Her white coat sling over her arm. The air smelled like rain and exhaust, and her steps echoed down the narrow street. She was halfway up her building's stairs when a voice behind her said softly, "Dr. Douglas." She turned. It was James Parker, her first kiss, the boy from her teenage years in Baton Rouge. Now a man in a gray suit, hair thinning, but smiled the same. He looked awkwardly handsome, as if nostalgia itself had put on a tie. I was in town," he said, shifting his weight. "Thought I should talk to you about the letter." Stephanie blinked. "You came here?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I didn't know how else to respond. You wrote that you still remember the song we danced to at prom." She flushed. "That was 15 years ago." "I know, but I wanted to tell you," he hesitated. "I'm flattered, Steph, I really am. But I've got a wife now, kids." She nodded too quickly. "Of course, I wasn't expecting. I just didn't want you to get the wrong idea." There it was, the mercy tone, the kind people use when they think they're doing you a favor by softening the rejection. "Don't worry," she said, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "I never do." He smiled, relieved, and walked away. She watched him until he disappeared into the night. When she got inside, she closed the door and pressed her back against it, letting the tears come quietly. She didn't know how long she sat there, the sound of her own breathing filling the apartment. It was past midnight when she finally moved, walking to the window. The streets were empty now, glistening from rain. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, elegant posture. A woman who looked composed, but felt unraveled. She whispered to herself, "You wrote the truth, and the truth hurt everyone, including you." Her phone buzzed again on the counter, another unknown number. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then she picked up. "Hello?" There was silence. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 4 years. "Stephanie?" Her breath caught. Brian? He exhaled softly. Hey, yeah, it's been a while. She gripped the edge of the counter. You got my letter? I did. His voice was warm, low, a little rough, like he'd been holding too many words in his chest. I read it 3 times before I believed it was real. Her heart was pounding now, so hard she thought he might hear it through the phone. Did you hate it? She asked. He gave a soft laugh. No, God, no. I don't even know how to talk about it. But I needed to call you. Why now? Because, he said, you wrote things I never thought anyone saw in me, and I can't stop thinking about them. She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. I didn't mean for it to be sent. I figured, but I'm not sorry it was. Silence stretched between them. Full, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that once defined them. The stillness she'd always felt around him. How are you? He asked finally. Embarrassed, exposed, tired. He was quiet for a moment. You don't sound like the woman I remember. I'm not, she whispered. The woman you remember never thought anyone would read her heart out loud. Brian's voice softened. Then maybe it's time someone did. Something in her cracked open at that. He told her he was in D.C., that he'd been meaning to come to New Orleans for work next month, that maybe they could meet for coffee. I'd like that, she said, though her voice shook. Then it's a plan, he said gently. And Stephanie. Yes? I never stopped wondering what it would have been like if I told you how I felt before I left. Her throat went dry. You what? But the line clicked. The call ended. Stephanie stood there, her hand still on the phone, staring at the empty space his voice had filled. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rolling softly in the distance. For the first time in days, she didn't feel only shame. She felt something else stirring beneath it, something like hope, fragile but real. She walked to her dresser, pulled open the empty drawer, and touched the space where her letters had been. Maybe this was what her mother had meant when she said love wasn't about safety. Maybe sometimes you had to be broken open for something true to reach you. Stephanie closed her eyes, whispering into the quiet. If one letter could find its way, maybe it was always meant to. Outside, lightning flashed against the New Orleans sky, and far away, in a quiet Washington apartment, Brian Reyes unfolded a cream-colored envelope and began to read. The first thing Stephanie noticed was the sound of his voice in person, softer than she remembered, yet heavier somehow, like time had pressed itself into it. Hi, Brian said, standing in the doorway of the hospital lobby. You look exactly the same. Stephanie blinked, uncertain whether to smile or run. You don't, he laughed, that same warm, boyish laugh that once filled the halls of her old apartment building. His hair was shorter now, streaked lightly with gray near his temples. You are listening to a narrated story on the MangaLove channel. Don't forget to share your thoughts about today's story. There were faint lines around his eyes, but they didn't dull his warmth. They deepened it. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city outside was bright with heat and sound, but the world around them felt small and still. I was supposed to be here for a conference, he said, but I came a few days early. Thought maybe you'd let me buy you coffee. Stephanie hesitated. She wasn't used to this, people showing up because they wanted to. She smoothed her lab coat nervously. You came all the way from D.C. for coffee? Brian smiled. Let's call it closure. Maybe curiosity. Maybe both. Her heartbeat fluttered unevenly. She nodded. Okay, coffee. They walked to a small cafe near the hospital, one with peeling green paint and the smell of cinnamon and chicory in the air. The place was quiet, sunlight slanting through the old windows. Stephanie sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her cup as though the warmth could steady her. Brian leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully, like someone relearning a language he used to speak fluently. I read your letter again before I came here, he said softly. Her breath caught. Why would you do that to yourself? He smiled faintly. Because it was honest. No one writes like that anymore. She looked down at her cup. No one was ever supposed to read it. I know. He leaned forward. But I'm glad I did. His words hung there, simple but carrying weight. Stephanie glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time in years. There was no pity in them, no discomfort, just the steady warmth that used to make her nervous and safe all at once. You really came back? She whispered half to herself. I did, he said, and not just for coffee. The air between them shifted, heavy with things unsaid. They spent hours together that day. Walking along the French Quarter, they fell into an easy rhythm, as though time had stretched but not broken. He told her about his life in D.C., the job at the nonprofit, the relationship that ended badly, the silence after. She told him about her work, the research, the hospital, the endless loop of order and solitude. And somehow, the spaces between their words felt as intimate as the words themselves. At one point, they stopped near the river. The Mississippi shimmered gold under the late sun, and the air smelled faintly of beignets and salt. You know, he said quietly, when I got your letter, it was the first time in years someone said something to me without expecting me to fix it. She turned to him. What do you mean? He smiled ruefully. My last relationship was all about pretending. Pretending I was okay, pretending she was okay. But your letter, it didn't ask for anything. It just told the truth. You said I made you feel calm, and that terrified you. Her cheeks flushed. I didn't mean to make you remember that, but you did, and it made me realize something. What's that? That I've been running from the only kind of love that ever felt real to me. Her breath hitched. She looked away, the sky turning a deep, bruised purple. Brian, don't say that, she whispered. You don't know me like that anymore. People think they can handle me, but they don't understand what it's like. What? What's it like? Her voice cracked. Being me. Needing quiet when they want chaos. Needing space when they want closeness. Always explaining why I am the way I am. And watching the light fade from their eyes when they realize I'll never change enough to make them comfortable. He stepped closer, his expression soft but unwavering. You don't need to change for anyone, least of all me. She shook her head. You say that now, and I'll say it again tomorrow, he said quietly, and the day after. Her throat tightened. Don't promise me that if you don't mean it. He smiled faintly. You think I came all the way here because I didn't mean it? The city around them blurred, the sounds of street musicians, laughter, cars, all distant. Brian reached out, his hand brushing hers, light as breath. She flinched at first, not from fear, but from the shock of being touched gently. I missed you, he said softly, even when I didn't know I was missing you. Stephanie felt her heart stumble into that familiar, dangerous rhythm, the one she used to silence by writing instead of speaking. But now, there were no letters, only this moment. Brian, she whispered, I don't know if I can do this. Do what? Let someone stay. He smiled, small and patient. Then, let me stay. That evening, he walked her home. The air was thick with humidity and the faint smell of rain. They reached her building just as thunder rolled across the sky. She hesitated at her door. You should probably go before the storm hits. He looked up at the clouds. Too late. Rain began to fall, sudden, heavy, relentless. They laughed, both caught under the awning. Stephanie pushed her hair back, her white blouse clinging to her shoulders. Brian looked at her, really looked, the way someone might look at a sunrise they thought they'd never see again. God, you're beautiful, he murmured. She froze, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, not like a compliment, but like a truth. The thunder cracked. She whispered, Don't. What? Don't say things you'll regret. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The only thing I ever regretted was not saying them sooner. She felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. Why now, Brian? Why, after all this time? He reached out, gently tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. Because I'm tired of running from the things that make me feel alive, and you always did. She wanted to step back, to protect herself from the gravity of his words, but her body betrayed her, leaning closer instead. The rain softened, turning the city into a watercolor of lights. I don't know if I can give you what you deserve, she whispered. He smiled sadly. I'm not asking for perfect, Stephanie. I'm asking for honest. The kind of honest you write about when no one's supposed to read it. Her breath caught, a shiver running through her. I don't know how to love without breaking something. He lifted her chin gently. Then, let's break carefully. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't a grand cinematic kiss. It was trembling, raw, soaked in the ache of everything unsaid. It was two people finding the courage to exist in the same truth at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying quietly. He didn't wipe the tears away, just rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. Don't run, he whispered. I'm not, she said. Not this time. Later, when the rain stopped and the city had gone quiet, they sat by her window, 2 cups of tea cooling between them. He told her about the nights in D.C. when he'd thought of her, the way she used to water her plants at exactly 7, the way she hummed when she was deep in thought. She listened, her heart filling with something that wasn't quite peace, but was close enough. When he left that night, he didn't kiss her again. He just said softly, I'll see you tomorrow, like a promise. After he was gone, Stephanie walked to her dresser. The drawer was still empty, but this time she didn't feel its emptiness as loss. She found a blank piece of stationery, smoothed it flat, and began to write. Dear Brian, you came back, and maybe for the first time in my life, I believe someone when they say they mean it. I'm terrified, but maybe love is supposed to be terrifying when it's real. If I never send this one, it's only because you already know every word. She folded the page, not to hide it, just to keep it safe. Outside, New Orleans hummed again, alive, endless, and full of second chances. The sun was beginning to set over New Orleans, painting the city in strokes of honey and rose. From her balcony, Stephanie could hear the faint hum of a trumpet somewhere down on Frenchman Street, slow, aching, beautiful. It was the kind of evening that asked for peace, but her heart was anything but still. It had been 3 weeks since the rain-soaked night when Brian kissed her. 3 weeks of morning coffees, walks through City Park, quiet dinners filled with laughter that felt like healing, and yet every time he reached for her hand, a tiny voice whispered in her chest, what if he leaves too? She wanted to silence it, to believe in the constancy of this new love, but fear had lived inside her for too long to vanish overnight. Tonight, though, she wanted to try. She sat at her desk by the window, a blank sheet of paper before her. Not a letter to hide, but one to give. The lamplight glowed softly on her skin as she wrote, her handwriting steady and elegant. Dear Brian, I've written you so many letters I never meant to send, but this one is different. This one is meant to be read. You once told me I was brave for loving people who never loved me back. I don't feel brave. I feel human, raw, terrified, and alive. You came back and changed the way I see love. You taught me that maybe love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Maybe it just has to be true. If I ever doubt again, promise me you'll remind me that I'm not too much, or too strange, or too quiet to be loved. Promise me you'll stay, even when the silence feels heavy. I don't need perfection. I just need you. Always, Stephanie. She placed the letter into an envelope, but didn't seal it. She wanted him to read it tonight, with her there, not in secret. Brian arrived just after 7, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked tired, but when he saw her standing by the window, his entire expression softened. "Hey, beautiful," he said gently. Stephanie smiled. "You say that like it's easy." He chuckled, stepping closer. "It is." She handed him the envelope. "I wrote you something." He blinked, surprised. "Another letter?" "The last one," she said. He opened it carefully, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. As he read, the room filled with silence, but not the kind that hurt, the kind that breathed. When he finished, he folded the letter slowly, looking at her like she was something fragile and precious. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think love had to be dramatic, full of fights and grand gestures. But this, it's the quietest thing I've ever known, and the truest." Her throat tightened. "Does that mean you're staying?" He smiled, stepping closer until there was only air between them. "It means I never left." She felt her eyes sting. "Brian?" He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Stephanie. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are." Her tears came freely now, but they weren't born of pain. They were release. She whispered into his chest, "You found me when I stopped believing anyone ever would." He held her tighter. "Maybe I was always meant to find you." In the weeks that followed, their lives began to blend in small, beautiful ways. He started spending more time in New Orleans, extending his work trip into something permanent. She learned to share her space slowly, hesitantly, letting him in, not just physically, but emotionally. There were mornings when she would cook breakfast in quiet, and he'd read the paper beside her without speaking. That silence no longer frightened her. It felt like harmony. There were nights when her anxiety flared, when sounds became too sharp or the world too bright, and Brian would sit beside her on the floor, no words, just presence. Sometimes he'd hum softly until her breathing steadied. And then there were the moments that made her heart ache with joy. The way he reached for her hand during hospital galas, the way he introduced her to his friends, not as a doctor he knew, but as the woman he loved. For the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's exception. She was someone's choice. One evening, as spring melted into summer, Brian took her to the garden behind her apartment building, the one she'd filled with jasmine and ivy. The sun was dipping low, the air thick with the scent of flowers and the hum of crickets. He turned to her, his expression soft but nervous. "I was going to wait," he said. "But waiting doesn't make sense anymore." Stephanie frowned slightly. "Wait for what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I don't want to rush you," he said carefully. "I know you need time and space and safety, but I also know that I've never been sure of anything in my life." He opened the box. A simple gold ring gleamed in the fading light. "Stephanie Douglas," he said, his voice trembling, "will you marry me?" She froze, not because she was unsure, but because her heart couldn't contain the feeling all at once. For years, she had written letters to men who never came back. Now, the one man she'd never dared to hope for was standing before her, asking to stay forever. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Brian exhaled, laughing in relief as he slid the ring onto her finger. And when he kissed her, the whole garden seemed to breathe with them, flowers swaying, air shimmering. Their wedding was small, quiet, and deeply theirs, under an oak tree in City Park, with only close friends, family, and the low hum of jazz drifting through the air. Stephanie walked down a short aisle lined with magnolia. Her dress was simple, ivory silk that moved like water. Brian stood at the end, tears already on his cheeks. When she reached him, he took her hands, squeezing gently. "You remember the letter you wrote me?" he whispered. She smiled through her own tears. "Which one? The one that found its way?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, creased from years of being held, read, cherished. "I kept it," he said, "and I want to read a part of it back to you." His voice shook as he unfolded it. "You make stillness feel like home." He looked up at her. "You still do." Stephanie's heart broke open in the most beautiful way. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't pull out a vow written in advance. She spoke from memory, from the place where words were once her only refuge. "I used to write letters because I didn't know how to speak," she said, her voice trembling. "But loving you taught me that I don't have to hide behind paper anymore. You read what I never meant anyone to see, and instead of running, you came back. You made me believe that I don't have to be perfect to be loved, just real." Brian's eyes shimmered. "Always real," he said. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Brian kissed her with a tenderness that felt like forever. Applause broke softly around them. Laughter, music, the rustle of trees. But for Stephanie, it was just the sound of peace. That night, as they lay together in their new home, the same apartment that once held only silence, she got up quietly and walked to her dresser. The drawer that had once held her secrets was still there. She opened it slowly. Inside lay stacks of blank paper and one small note resting on top in Brian's handwriting. She smiled and unfolded it. "For every letter you'll never need to write again." Stephanie laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "No more letters I'll never send." From behind her, Brian murmured sleepily, "What are you saying over there?" She turned, smiling through her tears. "Just saying I love you." He reached out a hand. "Then come say it here." And she did. Outside, the city breathed alive with music and light, the sound of a trumpet somewhere rising like a prayer. Stephanie lay against the man who had read her heart and stayed, the man who turned her letters into a life. And for the first time in all her years of writing, she didn't need words to explain what she felt, because love, the kind that stays, had already said it for her. Thank you for listening to MangaLove Storytelling. If you find the story meaningful and enjoyable, please remember to give MangaLove a like and subscribe so you won't miss the newest stories. Wishing you a wonderful day.